I'm Janie Cheaney, the author of the Wordsmith series, and I am here to share with you how I learned to write a story. Now, when I was a kid, I had no interest in being an author. I read all the time. I loved stories, but I knew I couldn't write one because I didn't have the kind of imagination it took to write a story. I thought that authors just sat down and dreamed up stuff, and that's where their stories came from. Obviously, in time, I learned to write a story. I have 6 published children's novels to my credit and quite a few unpublished ones. So I learned how to finish a story. I didn't realize when I was a kid that I have the same thing that all authors start with, and so do you. I'm going to represent that with a plain piece of paper. On the other side is a map. And this map represents the world of experience that you have inside you. Everybody does, and so do you. So, what does your world consist of? You may think, oh, I never do anything interesting. I've never gone anywhere. My family's boring. Um, I just, yeah, I don't have much to write about. But you have a world of experience. It's not just what you do, even though you've probably done more interesting things than you think. I like to ask school groups when I visit them, how many of you have ever taken a ride in a hot air balloon over the fairgrounds? I've never done that. How many of you have ever broken a bone? I've never done that. How many of you have ever fallen out of a boat? I've done that. How many of you have ever been to a foreign country? Which ones? I'll bet you've been to some countries I haven't been to. So we all have experience that's different from everyone else. And that's what we start with. That's what we can use to fold into our stories. Doesn't mean that you don't make up stuff. All authors make up stuff. But even that, in a way, comes from their experience. We just call that secondary experience. Your experience is also what you read, what you think about, what's important to you, what your family's made of, the stories that other people tell you. All those things go into your experience. And you can then take that experience and fold it into a good story. Now, I'm going to use this piece of paper to demonstrate just how you do that. And I'm going to start with what I think is the perfect story shape, or the basic shape that represents a story. And I think the perfect shape to represent a story is a diamond. So think about it. Every story starts from a certain point. There's usually the story starts when things are going along normally, and then something happens that changes everything. And events occur. More characters come in. The characters change the action changes the character. All this stuff is beginning to happen, and your story from a single point will broaden out into a middle. You've probably heard that all stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and this is how it works. Your story spreads out, but then it has to end sometime. And the way you make it end is to take those events that have been happening and developing and start to narrow them down to the point that we call the climax. So most authors would tell you, you might be able to guess that the most difficult part to write of a story is the middle, because you don't want to rush it. You can't come to the end without your reader becoming involved in the characters. So that takes some time. On the other hand, you don't want to drag it or your reader will lose interest. So that part in the middle, it's very tricky. And that's where a lot of stories go astray. But if you're working it right, if you're seeing the conclusion and your characters are developing and you're seeing what your story is about, you're going to bring those events to a sharper point. Now, when we talk about what your story is about, that's what we call the theme. And the theme of the story could be all kinds of things. It could be finding the strengths in yourself, or it could be finding the weaknesses in yourself and learning how to overcome them. It could be standing up for the right thing when everybody else is not. It could be the age-old quest story, or it could be the coming of age story. All those things are part of the theme, and that's when you discover what your story is about. So I've made a sharper point here to illustrate that. You begin to develop all your events and all your characters toward that particular theme. So here we have the experience that you started with, that you shaped into a solid story shape, and you've discovered the theme, and you brought the story to a sharper point. Now, what makes your story different from everybody else's? That's where the third element comes in. You've probably heard that there are only a handful of basic story plots. I'm pausing here because some people say that there are only 2. Some people say that there are 7. Some people say that there are as many as 20. So there are different theories about just how many plots there are, but there are only a handful. Most writers will agree on that. It could be the old quest plot, where you're on a journey to fulfill a mission. It could be coming of age, again. It could be reversal, the reversal plot, rags to riches or riches to rags. It could be the stranger comes to town plot, and all the things, all the events that evolve from that. So what makes your story different from other stories with a similar plot? Well, that's the fun part. That's where your details come in. And again, your experience can help with the details. If you've done something personally, then you'll know how it's done, and you can add all those details to your storyline. Not too many, but enough to be authentic and to add interest. This is where historical research comes in. If you're writing a historical novel, you want to add those little details to make it seem like, hey, she knows what she's talking about. Or, I didn't know that. That's really interesting. The details are what makes your story different from everybody else's story. So you want to add lots of detail, not enough to weigh down the plot, but enough to add interest and variety. So again, your experience comes in here also, because these are the things that you read, the things that you research, the things that you've actually done yourself. So I'm adding these little kinks to my basic story shape to illustrate the idea of adding details that will set your story apart from everyone else's. Now, I'll be honest, this takes a lot of practice. It doesn't necessarily come easy. Everybody's got the experience to start with, remember, but shaping it and knowing how much detail to put in and knowing how much development to allow, all that takes some practice. But when you've finished a successful story, there's no bigger thrill. So I'd like to encourage you to give it a try, because if you do it right, your story will take off and fly.